Hello and welcome to Scilence, a podcast that gives women a chance to get honest and open about what it's really like surviving and thriving in what often feels like a male-dominated world. All of my guests have been handpicked from the field of science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM, where inclusivity and diversity can be a real issue. I know this only too well, having been a mechanical engineer myself for a number of years. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, now a television broadcaster. I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation over the years, and through my TV work, I've met some incredibly inspiring women from a diverse range of STEM fields. These women are true trailblazers, and I've often felt so empowered myself by learning what they're like as real people, usually when the TV cameras have been turned off and they're just being themselves. Each week on Scilence, one of these women shares her unique experiences and truth without the usual pressure and stress of having to promote her accomplishments or uphold her impressive reputation. How? Because all of my guests are deliberately kept anonymous and disguised to ensure that we as listeners are not distracted or maybe even intimidated by all the usual kinds of societal labels and trophies. The women of STEM on this show have amazingly impressive CVs, but most importantly, they're human, just like the rest of us, and I want to share the inspiration and wisdom that I've gathered from them with you. It's my hope that you really relate to what we chat about today. If so, please do subscribe to Scilence and maybe even rate and review the show. I'd love to have your feedback. This week, my guest is in the field of medicine. She's a surgical oncologist and founder of a tech company. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so well. And I was just listening to that intro and thinking how freeing it is to be able to have a conversation for this reason, which is really just to share
Yeah.
stories and experience so that we can possibly help other women navigate situations that, we've been through ourselves. So I really am so grateful that you are doing this.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that kind of feedback because, often I want to scream and shout from the rooftops the kinds of guests like yourself that come on the show that are just so incredibly inspiring. Because I think if people knew who I had on the show, I'd get like a massive flood of traffic. Um, but, I have to rely on the strength of people's kind of word of mouth and honesty as to what we end up sharing, and I cannot wait to hear your story because I've known you for a while now and I've always been so incredibly inspired whenever I've been around you, and I've been kind of watching your growth and evolution in all your projects. And, to actually hear how it all began is what I'm most excited about. So tell me, in terms of getting into medicine, was this something that you always dreamed of doing from an early age?
Yeah, I was that kid that was always fascinated by the human body and uh, life cycles, reproduction. I grew up on a farm and seeing the insemination because my family was involved in vitro fertilization, actually, of cattle in years before this became more standard practice. And so I was always fascinated by watching the cycle of life and trying to understand how these things work. So biology was my favorite subject. At the same time, I also loved books and narratives and storytelling. And so, as I kind of pursued the sciences, I really looked at it as a way to tell stories about our lives, and how we exist in the world. So that was my drive. When I ended up in college and had to choose a major, um, I actually took it as an opportunity to, of course, complete all the pre-med requirements, but also to look at literature, because for me, it was the mind body connection that always fascinated me most. And in fact, I was sure that I was going to be a pediatric endocrinologist, focusing on psychoneuroendocrinology. This is kind of my my
Oh
thing
my
that
gosh.
fascinated me. how
That's a
how
lot of
the
words that I don't actually know the meaning of.
well, how the brain and our hormones affect everything about the way we think, feel, and exist in the world. It turned out that when I rotated through my surgery rotation as a medical student, I was absolutely captured by the process of surgery, by the tools, by the idea of, here's a problem. This is, like a puzzle, how you can figure out how to solve this problem. And, so once I'd done surgery, I was like, oh, this is what I need to focus on. And then cancer, of course, because it was the ultimate challenge for me. So that was
Mm,
really kind of what drove me. Hmm. Um, and then as I started moving through the process of the training, I was really struck by some of the things that disappointed me. And, I want this to be an inspiring conversation because I think that there's nothing more fascinating or exciting than what's happening in science and technology. And I think it's a wonderful intellectual pursuit and career path. But there are certainly challenges for women and for, I'll just say it, for sensitive people. Um, so, moving through the training, I really got to see the way that medicine, has been created as a system traditionally by men and to be practiced by men. And as more and more women find their way into medical school classes, so now it's just surpassed 50% actually female, at least in the United States. Um, we're really questioning and challenging the way things are taught. So I'll never forget, first year anatomy lab dissecting a human body. And this is one of the more shocking things that I experienced, but came time for the final exam. And there was this is pretty graphic, Chinny, but I'm just going to say it. There was
mm.
a quartered human pelvis. So, cut off at the abdomen and at the top of both thighs, legs spread with an arrow pointing to the clitoris. And the card said, "What is this structure?" And I was pretty shocked by that.
Mm.
It was the brutality. It was also the obviousness of it. So the idea that some professor was kind of making a sexualized joke about a quartered female pelvis, and of course all the students burst out laughing when they got to that station. But it was
That's
really
so awful.
it was awful. It was traumatic, you know,
Mm.
um, because of so many things. The vulnerability of the female pelvis. Kind of. Uh,
Was it just you that felt very sensitive to that, or did you, um, confide in other women? Were they also offended by that?
There was one other woman in my med school class who I confided in, and she felt the same way. We
Mm.
actually went to the professor. This had been earlier. This was before the final exam, actually, to talk about some of the callousness that we felt was being transmitted in the way that we were taught to approach the human body, really questioning it and challenging it. And we were received with respect and openness. And I didn't feel like I was being laughed at directly, but I definitely felt other. I definitely felt like my reaction was not the normal reaction that most people had to that.
To get an idea, how many other girls were there in that class?
So I don't know the exact split of the demographic. I think it was slightly male dominant at that time.
So there were enough women in there to have just, branded that as being completely inappropriate.
I would think so. Yeah, but perhaps they didn't feel as comfortable. I mean, so I'm the one who, ran the women's issues club in high school. Like I went to a women's college. Feminist activist from an early age. So
Mm,
I was, I think, particularly sensitive and primed to be
right.
on the lookout for things like this, I have to say.
Yeah.
At the same time, it was shocking to me that there wasn't more of an uproar as we
Mm.
were, experiencing these kinds of things.
I think the most traumatic thing about my experience in mechanical engineering with events as traumatic as those was actually not being able to be heard and not finding my voice to communicate how distressing things like that was. And so I think at the time, if I had been able to speak out and say that was distressing, then maybe I could have let it go. But the fact that I didn't have a voice at that time meant that I carried it all throughout my life.
Right.
And it sounds like that's what maybe the other girls in your class may have suffered from, because I mean, that is distressing. It doesn't matter who you are. It's so disgusting.
I agree. And I have witnessed many episodes and things like that I haven't necessarily spoken out about. And I do to this day still carry those things with me and feel regret that I wasn't more outspoken. It's it's really a fascinating psychological kind of study, and
Mm.
um,
Why weren't you more outspoken? What
yeah,
stopped you?
well, because of I think the inner, what is they call it, fraud complex that so many women suffer
Right.
from, that
Imposter syndrome.
doubting, right, imposter syndrome. There we go. Imposter syndrome, where there's there's this self-doubt, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Do I belong here? Am I going to be found out?
Mm.
And you always want
Right.
to give other impression that you're cool, you're good with it, this is nothing, and you don't want to be singled out as the person who has the problem. You obviously you're getting you know uh you're getting graded, you're getting
Yeah. You're being judged
recommendations,
and criticized,
judged
essentially.
from these people that you are witnessing, engaging in these questionable things. So, and that the power that they have to shape your entire career is it's real. So
It's a form of suppression, isn't it?
it is, and blatantly, like in today's language, I think we would be very clear, like that was actually sexual harassment of all the female students in that anatomy lab on that day.
Mm.
Institutionalized sexual harassment, I
Right.
believe, you know, um, because you know it wasn't like we were identifying, the fifth branch of the nerve coming off of this obscure, it was very obvious. It was meant to be a joke.
Mm.
And I think it probably wouldn't, I don't know if it would happen today. I can't put it past. Yeah, I wonder though, with today's awareness and sensibilities, if that would have
Mm.
happened.
I mean, I honestly thought I had it bad, but that really makes my skin crawl, the idea of what you went through. And that's probably just one of many examples, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because we are starting to see, I think, post Me Too movement. Well, Me Too is in progress, and I feel like this show, in a way, is contributing to that because these are the Me Too stories for women in STEM, right?
Mm.
That you're telling and being a part of bringing out into bringing a voice to. But just this week, I saw a bill had been introduced in Colorado that was going to make uh, pelvic exams of women under anesthesia without their consent, finally make that illegal. And so this is another thing that I feel an enormous amount of discomfort with in terms of even my own complicity and participating and witnessing this horrendous thing, which is how medical students are taught to perform pelvic exams on women when they're under anesthesia. And I'm not sure if you've heard that this happens, but essentially at all major teaching institutions where medical students are present, if a woman has consented for a surgery and it involves something to do with the lower half of her body, or she's in on a OR table with her legs in stirrups, very frequently medical students, and there could be 4, there could be 5, there could be more, and residents are instructed to perform a pelvic exam on her while she's unconscious, purely for their own learning purposes. And this is not something that I believe most women would be thrilled about at all to
Mm.
know how to on. And it's not discussed generally with them before they sign their surgical consent. And I believe that we need to be sharing these stories so that all women know. They have to specifically say to their surgeon, this is not okay with me. I do not want this to happen. And, I trust that you will not let it happen when I'm, under anesthesia.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine what it felt like to be like a feminist woman, in training on her surgical rotation, hoping to get that top grade so you can progress in your career, and being
Right.
like expressly directed, do this, feeling uncomfortable about it,
Mm. Yeah.
and doing it anyway. I mean, that's an enormous burden that I think I have carried. And I think, trying to spread the word about this is, in a way, my almost living amends for that.
How and when did you find your voice on this subject?
Well, interestingly, I think that it's when I shifted out of the world of, uh, you know, academic medical practice.
Right.
Um,
So you
for
essentially have nothing to lose by
Yeah,
speaking up.
isn't that funny? Because I notice with interviews that I had done, while I was in practice and still seeking the approval of, my elders, my mentors, my bosses, my superiors, I would censor myself, and I would, hold a belief maybe in my mind, but I wouldn't necessarily share that belief. But there was, essentially so many of these experiences accumulated over the time that I was in active practice, and I've shifted out. So now I'm writing. I have this tech company. I had a journey through an international medical nonprofit, which I co-founded and scaled, globally. So I have had an alternative, I would say, career path.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
wasn't until I had put a little bit of distance behind me that I realized how much of my true beliefs and feelings I had been, editing,
Yeah.
curating, suppressing, out of this really what was fear of being rejected, fear of ridicule, because there's a lot of that as well. There's this groupthink mentality, and when people start expressing thoughts and feelings that are outside of that, they become targets. And
Mm.
at that time in my life, I didn't possess, really, I don't know what it is, the courage
Yeah.
to just unapologetically, state my views. And that's something I would say.
When you say at that time of my life, I mean, what was going on for you at that time that you felt you couldn't leave?
Oh, well, I was, as I think many of us are in this field, particularly as women, because we've had to plow through even more challenges than our male colleagues to get where we are. I was extremely driven. And so, I had big dreams and goals, and I was going to do everything in my power to pursue those and move forward, even if it was sacrificing not only my own kind of
Principles.
beliefs at
Yeah.
times, and, but also my health. And so, now we're getting into the part of the story. I mean, we've missed so many. I could tell you so many episodes where, in training, just overt comments. Can I use a bad word on this podcast? You can beep it out if you want to, but
Go for it.
I'll never forget I was in residency on a surgery rotation, and my male head of the department of surgery, I was operating with him, and he was in charge of the entire rotation, my grade, my entire future, really, because you can't go into a surgical residency if you haven't aced your surgery rotation as a medical student. And he was talking about what a Hillary Clinton was right beside me, so I was thinking about that episode and experience, as we're operating, he's, and he is completely in such a misogynistic, derogatory way, talking about, a woman in power and in the public eye, and using a blatantly misogynistic term to describe her. And I was thinking, can you imagine if, say, I was African American operating with a white male doctor, and he was referring to a prominent African American person and called them the N word? Like, that's essentially the equivalent, really.
Mm.
Um, and you just had to just keep going and not react. And, well, or maybe I didn't. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have put down the instruments and walked out of that room and told the dean of my medical student school to, void my entire rotation, that I would repeat it because I refused to be graded and evaluated by a misogynist.
But then you're
Um,
being held back by somebody else's
Absolutely.
limitations.
Absolutely. So I just held it in and proceeded, and, got the top marks on that rotation.
Good
And,
for you.
well, I don't know. I don't
But,
know. Good for me.
well, I mean, even though it's a horrible experience to go through, that must have taught you so much about how to carry yourself in the world, because, the terrible truth is there are people like that do exist, that, just have entirely different perspectives on life to you. And it's how we deal with that that is probably of most benefit to us.
Yes, possibly. And at that time, how I dealt with it was by self-containment and just plowing through. And now, how I'm dealing with it, which I think is also to my benefit and growth, is by sharing it. Um, so, as I progressed, I had an interesting journey where I actually, at the end of fellowship, decided to enroll in a PhD program because I hadn't had enough school. And, you know, oh, there's a wonderful book that I want to tell your listeners about. It's called The Elephant in the Laboratory. I forget who wrote it, but have you encountered that book, Shani? Do you know about this?
No, I've never heard of that.
It's wonderful. It is The Elephant in the Laboratory, and it's about sexism and mom shaming, and essentially the female experience in science and technology in the lab.
Oh,
And
wow.
I,
Brilliant.
yeah, and what happens when you try to be a mother and a scientist, and different women, kind of, it's broken into chapters of different women telling their stories.
It sounds like a book you could have written.
Well, I'm living it, right? So
Yes.
it was very very deep, very personal, very honest, raw, and accurate, right? So when I moved into the PhD program, I really it was also the year that I had my first child. And here I was working at the research center at an academic medical center. And I had to pump breast milk in a bathroom stall, you know, in a dirty bathroom stall, not even a private bathroom, because there was no place for me as a female scientist who was, lactating to comfortably express breast milk, and feeling guilty every time I had to, you know, ask to step away
Gosh,
so that I could take care of that,
this
which
is
is,
shocking in the medical field.
you would think, right? And at a hospital, by the way. So I did find out that there was a lactation room, over in the main building, which would have been, maybe a 10 or 15-minute walk to get to that room to sit down, it wasn't doable for me. And so this was my experience, during that year. And we would go to a conference for the day, there wouldn't be a place to go. I would be in physical pain. I would develop mastitis. I would develop a clogged milk duct. I think most women who are in challenging careers and also trying to breastfeed and pump at the same time can relate to this experience. But you would think that being in my field of medicine or even of science, right, which
Yeah,
really
you'd have
understands
some kind of understanding.
to human health, how essential, like breast milk is to a baby's health and development, that there might be a little bit more, leeway here, but there absolutely was not. And in fact, you are viewed as, oh, the person who needs the extra time to do this, or, just like what happens when you have to leave an experiment in order to get back home to relieve your nanny. I mean,
Mm.
it's the world is really not set up, at least America, to be supportive of women in the workplace at all with children. But I think especially women in science.
And that's not just women in the STEM workplace, right?
Right, right. Well, we also have, yes, these bizarre kind of public stigma against breastfeeding in public for all women, and we really have a long way to go to normalize and destigmatize just motherhood in society, which sounds absurd, but it's true.
I,
Um,
I mean,
so, that was. Mhm. Go ahead.
what were you doing it all for? Because it really sounds like it was a slog. Um,
Yeah.
what was driving you to keep going?
Well, so I really loved my patients. I loved um, being able to accompany them through the most challenging times in their lives. I loved being a source of comfort to them and helping to allay their fears. I loved having the technical skill to, competently remove cancer from their bodies. Like there was so much that was as a surgeon in the PhD program, which I'll say flatly, because of motherhood and because of sexual harassment in the workplace, I actually, the only thing in my life I've ever stepped away from once I've started, I had to step away from the PhD program. But I was fascinated by the pathophysiology and the cell biology of cancer. And I was working on a very exciting project that I feel could have really helped illuminate the origins of ovarian cancer. So, I was really driven by that. I was like, what if, we could discover something that changed everything about, women's experience? And so that was part of my drive. So I just stuck with it. Also, I have to say, after so many years of the bottling things up, the plowing through, the having the goal, and the almost like blinders on, just charging towards that goal, it is difficult to step away, and your entire identity becomes wrapped up in that pursuit. And then you start thinking, who am I if I'm not a practicing successful academic surgical oncologist or scientist? um, who am I? And especially if you've compromised, I think, some of your core belief systems on the way there, then you really wonder, who am I? You know? So does that answer? I mean, it's a complicated question.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the satisfaction in your work for sure. In terms of meeting your sort of like your needs for compassion and empathy and doing good in the world, I can really understand why you were drawn to a career like that. But I'm picturing it as a weighing scale and seeing the kinds of harassment you went through as just deeply distressing. I didn't think that medicine would be that bad, purely because you kind of picture anyone studying medicine as generally having a high regard for humanity.
Yeah, well, but this is all relatively recent, right? That women have been such a force in the medical field. Um, Women, were excluded from medicine for centuries. I mean, especially once you had really midwives, who used to take care of women in childbirth, then you had them really forced out of practice as it was taken over by a very male dominated field. And now is really the first time we're having women return to that role. Um,
Why don't men want women in the field? I mean, one of the strengths of diverse teams is the fact that different perspectives are brought to the table. Why are women not welcome in the medical field?
Well, I think the answer to that was purely economic, right? So here was a lucrative profession with some power and prestige attached to it, and men were like, "I'll claim that. I'll take that." You know,
Right.
as at least in America, as reimbursement rates for medical services have declined sometimes by double digits every year from insurance companies, and medicine has gotten increasingly stressful and with decreasing financial returns and rewards, you've seen a very steep drop off in men choosing medicine as a field. So, much like teaching, teaching used to be male dominated. Now they can't, they have a hard time attracting male candidates to teaching school. So, it's unfortunately, as salaries and financial rewards decrease in any profession, we tend to see an increase in the proportion of female candidates.
Right.
So I think it's about money, honestly.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
I must
but
say, the picture you're painting isn't particularly attractive for medicine. I'm just going to be honest. Like, I never ever thought it was like this. It must. I wonder if it's just very America specific, or whether medicine is like this all around the world. I mean, gosh, I really hope not.
I don't know. I mean, I have done quite a bit of international work, and met doctors and lectured and around the world. And I think that there is a unique crisis in the healthcare system in America that is influencing this. But I do see these trends. In some way globally, but part of that has been the rise of the tech industry and startups and the finance industry. And I think that men um, are seeking higher paying professions everywhere, not just in America, and moving away from medicine. One thing I do want to say that, I maybe this is me as a woman, feeling like I'm responsible for taking care of everything and everyone, including the profession of medicine. There was some feeling of almost guilt or responsibility. Like if if the sensitive ones all leave, then what will people be left with, as their providers, as their healthcare providers? So, and in a way, I carry that to this day. I'll bump into people who will say to me, "Oh, we were all so devastated when you closed your surgical practice because now we don't have, fill in blank person to safely feel like we could send our patients there." And that was a very difficult decision for me because I was like, okay, do I continue to sacrifice my health,
Mm.
my.
Yourself, essentially.
Yeah, it was. And I know that this was written from a good place, but Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, when I read that, I was just like, oh, so she's telling me, stick with it, stay at don't leave, don't, as uncomfortable as it is, just stay there and fight it through. And, at that moment in my life, that was not going to be the healthy thing for me to do. So as a practicing surgeon, again, another episode that haunts me to this day for what I didn't say. Right, so we were at this. It's called Tumor Board, where you have a multidisciplinary group of doctors in a room. You have radiologists, pathologists, surgical oncologists. You have the head nurses. You have discussing different cancer cases, and I made a statement about a certain surgical approach as being the gold standard. And I'll never forget, this older male surgeon stands up, walks over to me, puts his hand on the top of my head and pats my head and says, "You're not teaching us anything, honey." And I was just like, oh my
Wow.
God, infantilized and condescended to,
But he
mansplained
did
and
that in front of
humiliated
everyone, right?
everybody,
So
everybody.
what did people
Yeah.
think?
I don't know what other people thought. Certainly nobody came up to me and said anything.
It's probably that fear of speaking up again.
Oh yeah, and he was the alpha surgeon in the room, right? So no one's really going to challenge that, because then they could become a target too. So it really was just a system of, uh, I don't know, sexism. Let's just call it what it is. That you just lived with and expected.
I feel like everything I've heard has been both shocking but also admirable because I feel like you have grown and evolved into an extremely tenacious woman. Would you agree?
I think I'm certainly more grounded, stronger, with a deeper sense of kind of conviction that I have a unique voice that is worth contributing to the conversation. So, yes, I feel healthier and stronger than I ever had in my life. And I do feel like what I've been through has helped build me into the woman I am today, and is going to inform every career decision, every move, and everything I do in the future for the better. So I am grateful for all of these experiences, as difficult and painful as they may have been along the way. And for every bad story I'm telling you, I don't want to give the wrong impression, because there were so many wonderful interactions. Women that really express such incredible gratitude or joy, or for me being a part of their cancer journey. And you know I don't know, there's so many rewarding aspects as well. So there is a balance. It was not one-sided. on the whole, I made a decision not to continue,
Mm.
practicing as a surgical oncologist, but I feel like it could very well be a wonderful career path for many women, and also that things have changed somewhat, I think, for the better. I mean, I'll never forget. So back to breast milk pumping, because I have 3 children. So,
Amazing.
that pumping in the bathroom stall was one thing. The covering multiple hospitals and driving between them, leaving the house at 4 a.m., you know, like pumping while on the freeway on the
Oh
way
God.
to, like these kinds of things, just were incredibly technically challenging. Because I do think also as mothers that besides breastfeeding, we take on an enormous amount of the emotional labor and the responsibility for organizing and coordinating every detail of our children's lives, their health, their well-being, their schedules, everything.
Mm.
So that is a freedom that I think many men have when they pursue their careers that women don't give themselves. I saw this amazing cartoon the other day, and it was, imagine runners at a track, and they're all at a starting line, and you see, the track, and you see men kind of just with the open empty track in front of them, and in front of the women you see like laundry machines and stacks of dishes, and they're in high heels and like pencils. They're all lined up at the starting line, and you're just going,
Yeah,
like, I
who
wonder
has
if,
the advantage, I wonder.
yeah,
Yeah.
who has it? Yeah.
But when I think about you, and then relating back to Sheryl Sandberg's leaning in, I feel like everything that you have developed along the way in terms of your character allows you to lean into your latest venture, which is this tech company. I mean, surely you must really have gathered some strength to be able to start a tech company all by yourself.
Oh, well, I think, yes, it was bold, and something that is completely outside of my training. Um, I did not study software or hardware, engineering. So I'm not. I need your skill set, but I do think that the work ethic, the tenacity, as you said, is definitely something. So I have learned to just keep going, just continue,
And
and
also the
that,
assertiveness. It
yeah,
sounds like you
yeah,
would definitely speak up today, whereas in the
mhm,
past you would have been too
yeah.
scared.
That's true. I mean, sometimes my reaction is it's not in the moment as I would hope that it would be. Something will rub me as wrong, and then I'll kind of sit with it for a day or so, and then I'll be like, "Oh, that's what that was." For instance, I was mom shamed essentially over a period of months by a male co-founder, and who was speaking to me in terms that I was like, this just feels really uncomfortable. But then I had an epiphany after one particular conversation, and actually my daughter was in the room, and the phone was on speakerphone, and after we hung up, my daughter said, "Mom, he was really being rude to you." And I was like, "Wow," because I knew it was an uncomfortable conversation, but she named it.
Mm,
She called it out. I had been making excuses because I felt like, oh, I'm not as knowledgeable on this subject, or
yeah,
I need to learn this. I'd been kind of
we make
diminishing my.
excuses.
Yes, yes. And but when she just called it out, and children, they hear tone and they hear energy,
Mm.
even more so than specific words. And when she called it out, I was like, oh my God, in my mind, that's exactly what that was. And, when he was telling me things like, you need to be immediately reachable at all times by text and email. And I'm thinking, I'm a mom. I'm not going to walk through my life, with my phone out staring at the screen, waiting for texts and emails to come in so I can immediately respond. I said, no, finally, right? Finally, I said, no, I'm a mother and a surgeon. I've been on call essentially my entire adult life. If there's an urgent matter, you can call me. And he said, well, that's just not the way business is done. And I was like, well, that's the way I'm going to be doing business. And,
Wow.
being able to counter that directly,
Yeah.
clearly, without shame or embarrassment.
In a split second, having to decide if you can say this or not.
Yeah,
Should I keep my mouth shut?
right.
Is this appropriate? I need to speak up for myself. Like all those thoughts running through your head.
Yeah, yeah. So, and ultimately, and this was in fact the most terrifying thing I ever had to do, I, I, I confronted him and said, I just don't think that this is the right partnership moving forward. And I bought him out and I negotiated, uh, strongly on my own behalf, so that I would have the equity needed in a cap table to build a successful business without him, because I knew that I did not want that energy in my company.
That takes
So that
so
was,
much courage to really stand up for what you believe something should be rather than trying to fit in and follow a groove that's already been made, essentially. Doing something new, and believing in it.
yes. And because it was something that was so new to me, I feel like it took an extra act of courage on my own behalf to believe in myself enough.
Exactly. Yeah, we're having to mostly fight our own self doubt.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So tell me something. Do you think, I mean, when I listen to you describe your daughter's reaction to the voice on the speakerphone and your reaction to the voice on the speakerphone, I'm wondering, what is it that changed you from the attitude your daughter has to the attitude you had? What made you lose the ability to detect being treated inappropriately?
Um, hmm, this is really personal, but I think that this comes back to uh, early childhood parenting messages. You know, um, my mother was, she's an example of a professional woman with a master's degree who sacrificed her career entirely to move to a different country to marry my father and have children, in a very isolated area where she had no support system, no intellectual stimulation whatsoever. So she kind of had to rationalize her own, here I am psychoanalyzing my mother, but she had to rationalize her own career decisions and find meaning in her own life. And, you know, she definitely messaged to me from a young age, um, that my main responsibility in life was to take care of the feelings and bodies of other people, and to put my own thoughts and feelings aside in order to do that. So
Mm.
I received that message in numerous ways continuously from a very young age. And
So essentially, abandoning yourself was the way to
yes,
function.
yes, abandon yourself in your marriage, abandon yourself in your body's desires, abandon yourself professionally. Like this is what a woman's role really is. And the irony of it is that my mother, I believe to this day, would consider herself a feminist, but she had so absorbed, and we're dealing with multi-generational brainwashing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And trauma and trauma. And so I hope that I am stopping that cycle. I also recognize that there are things that I continue to do, uh, probably in front of my children, that they're absorbing messages as well. Every time, you know, I'll just call him out. Every time my husband like gets up from the dinner table and walks and sits down in front of the TV without clearing a single dish, and my kids are watching me put the food away
Take
and clear the
over.
dish.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though I have also prepared the meal. Um, so that happens and that continues. But
And what
I
do you
do
do to correct that? Do you do something?
well. Yeah. No, I'll say, honey, would you help me clear the table? And he'll say, um, I'm really tired. I've been going all day. And, here's my victory. My 9-year-old son just the other night said, Mom's been going all day too. He spoke up for me. He
Wow, and
did,
he's male. Yes.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I was like, okay, my kids are seeing this. They're hearing that, but also, am I gonna have a fit over it, or am I going to just, take care of what needs to be taken care of and have a private conversation with my husband
Mm.
later? And that's what
I
happens.
mean,
And
you're
we'll
trying,
see if
you're single-handedly changing generational stereotypes and traditions here. It's a massive
I'm hoping
undertaking,
to.
you know.
Yeah, but my girls, you're right. Like they are so strong. They are so empowered. They hear statements being made, by our president. They will call them out for, being racist or sexist or whatever it is. Um, I also know that and we see this in women in STEM, right? And girls in maths and sciences. There's an age, I think it's around age 11, where girls who have had a lot of confidence in themselves and their abilities, we start seeing a fall off and in their pursuit of math and science. We start seeing them not having the same kind of confidence to put their hand up in a
Yeah,
classroom.
round around
And
about the age of around 10, actually,
right, but
statistically.
that's what my daughter is. Yeah, that's what my eldest daughter is 10 right now. So,
Yeah. Is that happening
I'm
to her?
really trying. No, no. So, she is absolutely in love with math.
I'm
The other day
smiling
we
right
went
now.
out.
Oh,
Yeah, we went out to a restaurant, and you know how they give kids the little kids menu with crayons to color? So she flips the page over to the blank side, takes the crayon and starts writing code.
wow.
And and like coming up with these numbers that equal letters if for code, and she has this whole page that looks like, a beautiful mind of symbols and code, and she needs to explain to me the code that she's just created and written and why it works and how this word really means that word. And I was just like, that's incredible. You're so creative, you're so brilliant, and I'm just enforcing that. I was reading the other day, MIT Technology Review. They had their like 120th anniversary issue, and my daughter takes the magazine from me, and she's looking at it and she's reading it, and she finds an error in one of the pie graph charts
What?
in this MIT Tech Review like published journal. And I could not be more proud. And I want to encourage her
Mm.
because I feel like math and science is the future. It's a future professionally, and it's an incredibly exciting, rewarding field to be in. So,
Just for the benefit of those listeners who don't have an incredibly supportive and nurturing mother like yourself. I mean, if they're sitting there listening to your descriptions of your daughter saying, I love math as much as that, but no one's in my corner. How do you have any advice for any young girls who are as interested and as passionate about STEM subjects, but just don't have anyone on their cheer team?
Well, I am a huge believer in mentorship. And so finding that teacher, that, after school math club led by, a strong woman in math or science, or even a man, who believes in you and is going to support and encourage you in your pursuit, that is a game changer.
Because they definitely do exist, don't they? Because I don't want my shows to kind of just be about um, claiming that men
All the bad
don't
experience.
support us.
Yeah.
I mean, they're less common, perhaps, but they definitely exist, and there are men out there that really want to nurture us, and it's not about gender. It's just about nurturing interest and passion and talent.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, that for me, a really good litmus test is how do I feel after a conversation with someone? Do I feel empowered, uplifted, excited, motivated? Or do I feel self doubt, diminished, demeaned? And if I really check in with myself, it's pretty clear, the people that are healthy influences that I want to, spend time with and learn from and be mentored by, and people that are, more toxic or unhelpful, we could just say. So it's finding those real champions and spending time with them. And then I also will just put in a plug for single sex education for
Mm.
girls. Um, as my daughters move into their next school, which will be in a couple years for their middle school, um, I'm looking at single sex education because of those critical years, ages 10 through, 17 or so, where we have this steep fall off. I feel like if young girls can be supported and empowered to really pursue their interests, without feeling embarrassed that the boys won't think that they're cool if they raise their hand in math
Yeah.
class. We I might be able to get them through to the other
Mm.
side, maintain this really exciting passion.
Yeah.
I did,
I mean,
yeah, I did a couple years at a all women's college in undergraduate. I also went abroad, but um, I think that it was enormously helpful.
yeah, and I have to say that with other episodes, other women in STEM have talked about single sex schools and how they basically grew up to believe that women can do all roles because they had to in single sex
Yes.
schools. And so, yeah, I must say, if I had to choose, I would be all for single sex too. Um, I mean, such fantastic advice that you're giving about sort of like the people we spend time with, and how we really need to check in with ourselves as to the effect they have on us. When you talked about your mother, I must say that I was having to bite my tongue because I so wanted to jump into that subject and really delve into it, but that probably would have been more material for two or three or more episodes of Scilence. But in terms of you growing up, who was your inspiration? Who uplifted you through all the education that you went through?
It's a really interesting question. And maybe it's telling that I have, I really struggle to answer that question because I don't know that I had a person, to tell you the truth.
Mm.
Um, I have not had, I have had different mentors periodically throughout my career, but None that have endured. And as I have grown and matured and come into my own voice and power, I've actually seen, patterns of behavior and things in my mentors that have been deeply disappointing. And I've also had the experience of being really hurt by one of my female mentors, where, and I wonder how much of this isn't the kind of behaviors and mindset that it takes to be extremely successful, fighting your way through a very male dominated, field to the top. I wonder if it hasn't changed, just the way she acts towards other women. But one of my deepest betrayals, in fact, was from a female mentor, and where her ego was challenged, and she did not have my back in the way that I would have hoped.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
So,
wondering how much of your drive was fueled on anger and resentment and just an absolute need to prove people wrong.
uh, I hope, I recognize that a lot of my drive might have been fueled by that, or even like a deep insecurity or feeling of not enoughness, that, maybe if I got this achievement, this award, that praise, I would feel finally enough, or good enough. So yes, I've done all the therapy to look at exactly those issues. But
But you know what's so amazing is like, regardless of what you think about your own trajectory, it from where I'm standing, you are a woman that absolutely has it all. What's your view on that? Do you agree? Has it been hard? I mean, do you see yourself as having it all?
see, maybe I haven't done enough psychotherapy, because I would still say, no, I don't have it all. I need this more. I need to raise this round of funding. I need to, um, anyway, I think that I am embarking on a new chapter. I think I have a lot to learn. I think that I am continuing to grow and expand. I have a lot more compassion for myself, and patience also than I've ever had before. Because I used to believe that I needed to have it all right now. And now I see, okay, I am just coming out of three children's early childhood. My youngest is 7. So, just really moving into some more independence, although they need me every single day, all the
Mm,
time still. Um, but I'm also much more empowered to set boundaries, and essentially to demand active co parenting with my husband. So it's all a work in progress. And I think that um, life is a series of chapters where we have more intensive focus on different aspects of our life at different
mm.
times. I believe, much like Michelle Obama recently famously said, that lean in shit is bullshit. I'm paraphrasing, but she called it out. She actually, I think, did use the word bullshit. But we all know that you can't have it all at the same
Right.
time, you know.
And you subscribe to
Um,
that too.
I do. And so at this moment, I am glad that as an entrepreneur, I have more flexible hours. I can, send emails in the middle of the night, or, do follow-ups at in random times of day, where, from the car after I've just dropped kids off somewhere, so I really appreciate that. I don't know that I would be the kind of cancer surgeon right now
Mm.
that would meet my own criteria for
Mm.
excellence, because I believe that, patients with serious medical illnesses um, need and deserve to have pretty complete focus, and that's not where I am right now. Maybe this is my perfectionism. Maybe this is a lack of a system that's supportive enough in other ways. But I couldn't be the kind of cancer surgeon and mother right now at this moment that I want to be.
And how much of the tasks that you've been juggling have been supported by your husband?
I mean, they're supported in different ways, right? So there's financial support, which is important, right? So being able to have resources to uh, hire help so that I can attend the tech conference in San Francisco next weekend.
Mm.
That's a measure of support. Um,
One of the reasons why I ask is because, women like yourself are so well rounded in terms of playing not just a conventionally female role, but also taking on quite a masculine role as well. And so I'm always so curious to know what kind of men women like you partner up with.
yeah. Well, I think I mean, we are actually, this is something you don't know, but we are uncoupling right now. So maybe that's part of the story here. I'm also finding my way, in demanding certain things from a partner. And it's okay, and it's all good, and it's loving, and it's supportive, but that's another chapter, right, of the journey, is taking this same grounded sense of self and bringing that into all aspects of my
Mm.
life. So whether that's professionally or personally, I know the kind of um, intimacy that I want and deserve, and that's okay. So that's to answer your question, because it gets a little bit more
Mm.
complicated. Um, However, I will say that I have witnessed in my husband a definitely a growth and an evolving awareness of feminism and of these issues that we're talking about today. Um, so I call it my bathroom moment, that doesn't involve pumping breast milk in a bathroom stall.
That's
This other
another
bathroom
one.
moment,
Yeah.
yeah, another bathroom moment I had, which I will never forget, was the day that I had a cancer surgery and he had a very important meeting, and the kids had some unexpected, but essential, and I forget what it was, thing that needed to be done for them. And we looked at each other, and it was that moment of like, well, who's going to do it? And he just said to me, well, right now, my career is more important than your career, you know? And
Mm.
yeah, yeah, it's cringeworthy, isn't it? And at that moment, um, you know, I mean, I was performing cancer surgery that morning, so it was, you couldn't argue that his career in terms of value added to human life or experience was more important, but it was paying the bills that were supporting our families, life and well-being. Um, that was another moment that I had to metabolize over, a series of years before I could be like, oh, that was deeply hurtful,
Mm.
and deeply unfair. And funny enough, what helped me realize that? I listened to Hillary Clinton's uh, book on Audible. She read it, the one after the election, What
Mm.
Happened? And she talked about how while she was married to Bill and he was president of the United States, he never made her feel that his job was more important than hers. And that really moved me because I was like, oh, like it's possible to have one of the most important, powerful jobs on the planet and not diminish your wife, you know?
Well, some
um,
might say he diminished her in other ways. So,
in other ways, but in that way, she did feel
mm,
that he had always supported her professional endeavors, right? So
mm.
that's interesting. Uh,
It's so interesting because I think ultimately, through all the experiences that you've described on this show, I feel like ultimately the only way to safeguard ourselves during those experiences is to take care of our needs and to ensure that we are giving ourselves what it is that we need to thrive. It's not going to be found in other people, and in other jobs and in our kids, but it has to come from within somehow. Um, yeah.
I agree. And I think that doing that deep personal work is so important because uh, other people in our lives ultimately, I believe, are just going to reflect back to us our innermost beliefs about
Mm,
ourselves, right? So if I'm feeling not enough, if I'm feeling like I don't have a voice, uh, I, I, I believe that I'm going to find examples out in the world that are going to reinforce that. um, and if I shift that inner belief system about myself, when those critical messages or hideously inappropriate comments or things come at me, they're not going to penetrate. They're going to roll off because I'll just recognize them as being untrue, as opposed to before when they had that deeply wounding effect. If I'm being honest, it's because they pushed a button, they struck a nerve. They were like, oh, is this true? And now I can kind of laugh and be like, nope, not true. So it's very freeing.
based on that, then, what would you advise girls who are thinking about taking STEM as a career path? Because I think some girls choose it out of fulfilling other people's expectations. But based on everything you've said, why then would you suggest to someone to follow a career in STEM?
Well, I think that STEM has it all. STEM has amazing narratives and beautiful art and fascinating intellectual problems to solve. I mean, there's really anything you want, you can find in a career in STEM, and infinite possibilities, right? And flexibility. If you have these concrete skill sets, you can then have much more agency and autonomy in shaping your life the way you want to. And that's my plug for kind of the hard sciences is once you've uh, reaped that knowledge, no one can take that away from you, right? So you have a quantifiable, objective skill set that can continue to serve you throughout your life. Not as true in the softer sciences, right? Um, so I'm a big advocate for it's like outfitting yourself for a journey, a long journey you have. You want to take the tools with you that can serve you well on that journey. And I feel like background and training in these hard sciences are excellent tools. That can also, by the way, with like modern, hiring practices and what big companies are looking for, give you the financial independence to have more agency in your personal life as well. So that's a big plug. And I just feel that we should run towards things that are challenging for us, because that's and even a little uncomfortable, because that's where I believe growth happens. That's where we come up against perhaps our own psychological kind of barriers that we've set, and begin to poke holes in those barriers and really question core beliefs that we hold about ourselves, what we're capable of, what we're not capable, and really push through that. So I'm an advocate for things that are hard. Um, but at the same time, I believe in self-care and getting a team together to support you when times get hard. So, one of the most challenging things, I think, is feeling isolated when you're going through a difficult situation. And so I would encourage, go to that all girls school, have your circle of girls that are all approaching this really hard math class together, work collaboratively, have relationships with mentors that you can go to talk about your feelings, process what you're going through, reap their support. But don't shy away from the challenges, march towards them, but with the help and support that you need.
Such a beautiful note to end on. I have goosebumps. You are a total inspiration. You're really living the suggestions and the mantras that you live by. And I thank you so much for coming on this show.
Oh, thank you, Shani. It was an absolute pleasure. And thank you for bringing these voices to share with other women, because we are not alone. And when we can hear someone else's stories and relate our experience to their experience, it gives us that comfort to know that there are others that have walked this path before us, and that we can keep going.
That's it from my STEM guest this week. Oh, I am absolutely gobsmacked by what I've heard today. What a journey my guest has had. And she has emerged so strong and so assertive and so knowledgeable and wise through all the hardships and the triumphs that she's been through. And I can honestly say, as someone who knows her personally, she is a woman that really has it all, and she's gained those things by pure hard work and passion and self-belief, and this absolute drive to push through any kind of adversity. I'm utterly inspired, and I feel like I'm going to need some time to process everything. Thank you so much for listening this week. Don't forget to rate and review the show, and even subscribe, and catch you next week on Scilence.